Congratulations, I'm Dr. Stude, and I am introducing Barro. He is born, in Maryland and grew up in Togo as West Africa. He's on the engineering pathway at Perimeter College. Nathan plans to continue his education and work in the STEM related field once he completes his studies. Please give a warm welcome to Nathan Barro.
Hi, I'm glad to be here to present about this subject. So, across the Black diaspora, oppression, displacement, and struggle have pushed Afro-descendants to not just perform but innovate music. We see this through a variety of instrumental innovations, from strings, winds, metal isophones, lamellophones, and much more. We see a pattern of reinvention, resilience, and ingenuity, taking from the past and to recreate the future. From North America to the Caribbean, North Africa, South America, and West Africa. So, we will start by talking about strings. So, as a lot of you may know, in many North American colonies, drums were banned as they were used for long-distance communication. That was especially the case following the Stono Rebellion of 1739. As a result of this ban, alternative percussions were developed using buckets, spoons, stick beaten on the ground, hand clapping, foot stomping, body percussion, so on and so forth. One example of this right there, usually it's a modern video, but give me a second, I have some technical issues here. This is the kind of thing as we saw earlier, that you will see in the band using drums, you see the blasting thing, the feet, clapping, using rifles and all of the things. But banning drums led not only to the development of these alternative percussions, but also of string instruments, specifically in lutes and fiddles. So in North America and the Caribbean, what we will start to see is the development of string orchestras, where string instruments instead of drums will be used. And there were mostly lutes and fiddles. We can see here an account from Trinidad and Tobago. As drumming was forbidden in public events, string orchestras comprised of the banjo, the salbox, which is a fiddle, became popular. Rhythmic accompaniment was provided by the tinketo and various good rettos. You see an example right there of those kind of orchestras. So you see the violin, which is the fiddle right there, and as well as the banjo. So what is the banjo? The banjo is an instrument that had a huge influence on American culture and on Caribbean culture, and early banjos were developed from what we call good lutes. So in West Africa, people have calabashes, which is like a fruit that forms like a wood, and this wood is used as a soundbox to resonate with the sound with the strings. You can see right there a few examples of early banjos that were good lutes. This one right there from North America, this one also from North America, this one also from North America, and this one I believe is one of the earliest examples that we still have in museums. It was from Haiti. One of the instruments among West African wood lutes that is the most similar to the banjo is called the akanting, from the Jola people of Senegal in West Africa. So you can see right there in the map the location. So one thing that is similar between both the akanting and the banjo is not just the build of the instrument, but also the playing style. So with the akanting and the banjo, there is something called the claw hammer, where somebody forms a claw with their hand to alternate quickly between different strings. And you can see right there, there is an infographic where you can see this technique, as well as some paintings of early banjo players using early banjo goats using the claw hammer, which still survive to this day in the banjo playing. So you'll see here an example right there, somebody explaining this technique.
The third string down, and then the thumb will drop to the second string and pluck and make it sound like
a claw to strum it a certain way, as we saw earlier. Another example that's on an actual song, just for reference. Now on the banjo.
Personally, I have not felt
Guys, for the ads, this is from YouTube.
my safety come into question. They do have the safety toolkit feature, which is easily accessible should anything go wrong, and it helps me feel even more safe while driving.
Build a website you love with Wix, where your words
see this technique being used across both those West African instruments, those good lutes, as well as even the modern one. Now, Jola people, they are from a region of Senegal that is known for rice cultivation. And during the Atlantic slave trade, there was a period in time during the 18th century, in the 19th century, where the Carolina plantations exported more slaves than any other colonies. And it is around the 18th century that we do see the emergence of these banjo-like instruments in the Western Hemisphere. So that might just be a coincidence, but it might explain the similarities between the banjo as well as the akanting. But African Americans also have a very rich tradition of fiddle playing, either using good lutes or the European violin. Which there are also fiddles in West Africa, which some scholars in their studies have compared to the fiddle playing of African Americans. the last fiddle, black African-American fiddle player carried out this tradition in the 20th century. He's deceased now, but those are some. So bands of fiddle and banjos survived well into the emergence of the blues in the 20th century. As you can see here, that's actually a blues band. So you see the banjo, and you see the fiddle, just like you saw in those old paintings. This is essentially the same kind of so-called string orchestra that emerged in the Caribbean, that emerged in North America and the Caribbean. It will be worth noting that beyond even just North America, we also see similar developments where West African gold loots evolved in North Africa. Through the trans-Saharan slave trade, there were West African diasporas in North Africa that are known as the Nawa people, and they developed an instrument known as the gwembri. The gwembri is similar to, again, a gold lute, similar to the West African goni, which you see right there, but it is much bigger. It has a bigger sound box, and as a result, it has more of a bassy sound. But even more interesting is the fact that the gwembri also uses the claw that we saw earlier, the claw hammer technique that we saw on the banjo and on the akontim. You can see someone here explaining.
Without the drum and with the drum.
And there are a lot of similarities between the West African diaspora in North Africa, the Gnawa, and the African Americans. For example, the Gnawa, they developed some traditions around the Sufi Islam, where they used some very transcendental music in some rituals to heal spiritually. And there are some similarities between this and also the ring shout that we saw earlier. So you will see right there. I apologize again for the ads because this is on YouTube.
Personally, I have not felt my safety come into question. They do have the safety toolkit feature, which is easily accessible should anything go wrong, and it helps me feel even more safe while driving.
Planet Fitness. We're all strong on this planet.
One more, everybody.
What I want you to pay attention to in this video are the clapping, the rattles, all accompanied by the gwembri, which again is very similar to the so-called string orchestra that we talked about earlier, and the development of those bodily percussions and rattles after drums were banned in North America. Now, this example does not feature any string instrument, but
all out of the old car. All out of the old car.
But let's not talk about how drums came back to the African American community, as well as wines. So, as we all know, America went through something called the Civil War, where the Confederate and the Republican, the Confederacy and there was the American Civil War that happened, right? And during the Civil War, African Americans also participated, and although they were banned from using drums before, now they were a prominent part of marching bands marching bands that used a lot of drums because that's part of military tradition, and wind instruments. As you can see, people with fifes, trumpets, and obviously drums. This developed into a form of blues known as 5/10 drum blues, which is very prominent in Mississippi, Louisiana, which was very prominent in those areas, where you would see people play with the fife and snare drums, military drums. And after the Civil War ended, even after the war, those fife and drum bands became very popular in the community, playing during community events, parties, and things of that nature. Here we'll see an example. Mississippi. Ask him just so you can. So yes, that is fife and drum blues that emerged as a result of the military involvement of African Americans in the Civil War, which then influenced their music through the marching bands in which they were part of, and reintroduced drums and wind instruments to their culture. Now, there is a wind instrument that became very prominent in American culture during the 20th century, especially after World War I, and it is the harmonica. So one reason that the harmonica became very popular is because for soldiers that might need some psychological relief from the pain of war and just warfare, it served as a loyal companion, something that you could always carry with you. I mean, it even fits in your pocket right there, you know? So, but before the harmonica, there was one instrument that was part of the African American culture known as the quill. So the quill is basically a panpipe, and you can see right there one used by Henry Thomas, which was one of the last quill player that was recorded. And you will hear William. So you see the quill is right there, and also you see that this guy is playing the banjo, right? What I want you to notice is when he's blowing a note in the quill, notice that he's alternating with his own voice, like he's blowing a note and then, like basically like he's explaining the instrument with his own voice. That's a technique called as, known as whooping. What is interesting is whooping also was prominent in some African traditions. For example, the Fulani do this. And what is interesting is going back to the harmonica, these techniques survive in the harmonica, as you will see here.
Here we go. Thanks for the plug. Good God, man, do it again.
So yes, that's whooping. Sorry for.
Here we go.
Yes, it alternates between blowing a note. No, it alternates between drawing a note because the harmonica is an instrument so that you can draw a note and blow a note. So it alternates between drawing a note and then doing a whoop, you know, like it's part of the instrument or doing the communication with the instrument. So the quill and the harmonica might appear different, but the playing principle of having an instrument in front of your mouth that you blow notes in, and then that is somewhat similar, you know. And there were some scholars have noticed that in New Orleans, I believe, there were skiffle bands, which were early bands of strings and drums, which preceded the event of jazz music. So those skiffle bands, they did use the quill in a lot of historical reports, but then the quill was replaced in those same bands with the harmonica. And the harmonica played the same instrumental role as the quill. So what is possible is that as a result of military involvement, the harmonica replaced the quill in African American culture and in the blues, which is why the quill so-called died out, right? Now, the blues music expanded the harmonica beyond a lot of other genres. It even created a technique known as bending. So when you bend the notes, it's when you draw it in a way that changes the note that you actually play. So your instrument might be a B on the free hole, but by changing the way you bend the air, you can play an A, you can play EB, all of that. So you can do this right there. So for example, I have a free right there, but if I bend it a bit, you see, and that creates also a sliding effect. And if you have ever heard the blues harmonica, this is often used as a result. And the reason they did this is because the harmonica was not really designed for blues music, as blues music has a different melodic standards, so they needed different notes to play. So that's what created those bands, right? And on top of that, the sliding effect that you have from bending those notes, it kind of creates a kind of a wailing effect. So even when I did it earlier, even though I'm not that talented, we noticed it. Now we will talk, so we talked about how military involvement shaped African American music, but the US military had an effect not only on African American music, but also on Trinidadian music, believe it or not. So Trinidad and Tobago is an island in the Caribbean. So in Trinidad, as we saw earlier, drums were also banned at some point in time. And as a result, people developed those string orchestras that we talked about. And those same string orchestras evolved later in the development of the banjo and all that. And specifically in Trinidad, we see this in the development of the calypso music, right? But even after that, there were a case in 1837 in Trinidad where after a carnival celebration, authorities banned strings and winds because they deemed that it was violence. It doesn't really make sense, but that's what happened. But as a result of the ban of both drums, strings, and all those things, what was developed was the tambu bamboo. So the tambu bamboo is bamboos that are cut in different lengths to produce different pitches and create a certain rhythmic arrangement. Somewhat like you are cutting the bamboos in a way to make some sort of xylophone, right? Drum music.
Trinidad and Tobago was a former British colony. Its people came from diverse backgrounds such as Africa, India, and South America. Drumming was used as a form of communication among the slaves. In 1884, the beating of skin drums was banned. As a solution, the people turned to bamboo, and tambu bamboo was created.
Now, after a while, those so-called tambu bamboo drums, they started to experiment with metal parts, I mean so-called iron bands. Instead of using the bamboo, they would use scavenged iron parts. But after a while, what they noticed around the 40s is that beating into those metallic parts, dents of different sizes will create different notes on the instrument. This created the first steel pans, which were very simple 4 notes. It was called the ping pong. So you see they beat different dents in each of those holes to create an instrument which is kind of like some sort of metallic xylophone, right? And then they use a stick to beat it into it. Now, at the same time, World War II was about to happen. And as a result, there were US Navy ships near Trinidad. And those US Navy ships, they carried oil drums, 55-gallon oil drums. Now, some poundmen, that's what we call the some poundmen, they noticed those oil drums and wanting to experiment with them, they decided to, a youth named Eli Manet decided to steal those drums, basically, from the US Navy ships. So what he and his friend will do, they would watch out for the guards and their watchdogs on the US Navy ships and wait to see if one of them would be gone. And as soon as they noticed that they were gone, they will sound the alarm, and quickly they will start swimming to the ship, you know, and then grab as many drums as they could and swim back again to shore. And as a result, they got those gallon oil drums. What they noticed is that those drums were of better quality than the cracker tins and other metallic containers that they used. And that helped them create better instruments, which created the modern steel pan. So here you can see Eli Manet, which is the unholy kid that stole those oil drums. That's what they did. A 19-note pan here and an actual image here. Also with all of the notes. But innovation did not stop there. Because the steel pan is a very unique instrument, so it's in metal and every note is in the same pan, it is very hard to harmonize. So there were a lot of harmonic challenges that they had to solve. And one of the challenges was in the overtones. So because, excuse me, give me a second. Because the steel pan is a metallic instrument and its sound was rich in overtones, it was hard to tune them because every partials of every note on every pan had to be tuned separately from the fundamental notes. Excuse me for all that music theorists, those who understand, but on top of that, there were a lot of sympathetic resonances between notes. So what I mean by sympathetic resonances, when you beat one note, it would also vibrate the nearby notes, right? So if it was not harmonized correctly, that would not sound very good because if it was not tuned properly. So if you had a note that did not sound well, just beating one note on one side would cause the other notes to vibrate. And if those notes did not harmonize well with that note, that would not sound very musically pleasing. So as a result of this, someone called Anthony Williams created a new steel pan known as the spider web steel pan. So this steel pan is arranged in a way that is accidentally similar to the circle of fifths in music theory. And in this arrangement, every note is arranged in a way in which the nearby notes harmonize together. Anthony Williams will also develop new techniques to harmonize the instrument. He will create something known as reinforcement, where one will beat into one note different dents to further harmonize the instruments. Then in 1956, a 14-year-old known as Bertie Marshall, who was frustrated with the inharmonic tones of the instrument, of steel pans at the time, decided to experiment with overtone tuning. So I will quote him right now. So that's what he said in his account. I used to live in John John. John John is a neighborhood in Trinidad. I used to live in John John, and that's where I first heard the steel pan. I knew tuning had to do with fire. So I like the fire in my house. Got an old pan and try to tune it with the fire. I nearly burned down the house. What makes me interested in tuning is when I heard Invaders and All Stars, that's a steel pan pen, and people used to say they are the sweetest pan, but I used to hear them and they were out of tune. My ear was sensitized to the harmonics because I was playing the harmonica. I could not take the pan these days. It was a noisy instrument. After those failed attempts at using metallurgy and almost burning down his house to tune the instrument, Bertie Marshall would develop new techniques. So he would labor for years and tune separate passages and single notes, give each one the right one so the overtone should not dominate the fundamental. And he would finally create a lot of techniques that steel pan tuners use to this day to properly harmonize the steel pan, which are a little too complex for me to go over right now, but he really innovated upon the tuning of the steel pan. So tuning the steel pan is a very delicate process. It's a very tedious process. It's an art, really and truly. You have to tap part of the note, tap the other part, move the note, shift the octave all over the place until everything marries at the right level. So it's a very, we'll see. Oh. You see somebody here tuning the pan, doing all these geometry inside the instrument. The steel pan eventually became a symbol of Trinidadian culture, even being featured on his coat of arms. You can see it here in the middle in gold. It was also immortalized in a song by the artist Black Stalin, known as Mr. Panmaker, where the artist talks about standardizing the pan so that Trinidadian culture can profit off of it. At the same time, celebrating.
Yes, it lies in you, the pan maker hand. Because the secret of making steel pan is you alone must know, and you must.
Sorry.
So must you would agree. You know, after stealing coated to make a base pan. Or what is the degree of heat you need to burn a pan? Or what is the size of the rubber to beat a high double tenor? These are.
But the process of tuning the steel pan by beating metal is very similar to another class of Afro-diasporic instrument known as the lamellophone, which we will see right now by talking about echoes of plucked metals. So lamellophones or senzas are instruments that are played by using the fingers, usually the thumbs, to pluck tones and produce sound. And those instruments were found in the diaspora in Brazil, Cuba, Suriname, the Caribbean in general, and even Louisiana. Some of these models that we found in the diaspora were very similar to those found here. So, for example, this one is exactly the same as an Angolan lamellophone, and that's actually from Brazil. But at some point, instead of using forged metal steels using metallurgy, they started to use scavenged steel from clocks. You know, for the clocks back then, they used to have the spring steel inside. They used to scavenge them and put them on the lamellophone. But those keys, they were wide and thin. So on the instrument, that would cause a very wide, bassy sound. And as a result, they developed bigger sound boxes, which created a new instrument known as the marimbula. That we found in Cuban music and a lot of Caribbean music, such as Jamaican mento. So I'm running a bit of time, so I'm not going to play the music anymore, but you can see that's a Cuban son band right there with the instrument. And here a mento band as well with the So mento, that's the Jamaican folk music. Notice that they are also playing the banjo and we have the marimbula here. But there are also big box, that's what they call them, big box sanzas in West Africa, very similar to the marimbula. So that begs the question: does the marimbula come from these instruments, or do these instruments are these instruments influenced by the marimbula? Well, to answer that question, some scholars have noticed that those instruments were not found in West Africa before around the 20th century. They were not recorded. So it is more likely that it came from the diaspora back to West Africa, probably as a result of the return of Afro-Brazilian communities and Afro-Cuban communities back in West Africa, which was not a very known phenomenon, but very common. To this day, a lot of West Africans have Portuguese names as a result of this migration back to West Africa. But then those big box terminophones were sized down in various places. They were sized down in Sierra Leone to create a new instrument known as the kondi. So the kondi is smaller than the kongoma, but it is not played like any other senza. Instead of using their fingers to plunk from the top instead of plucking from the bottom, right? So I have not seen this theory developed by any scholar, but I have a theory for why the playing style was inverse. So let's say you take a big sanza like this. You play it by putting it on your body, or as you saw with the marimbula, below your body, sitting on it. See if you apply the same ergonomic logic, and when you size it down, you are going to try to play it with it on your body, and it's not going to work because you have no mobility with your thumbs. It's gonna interact with your body. So as a result, they reversed the playing style, which led to the kondi. And this playing style led to it helps one pluck with not just the thumb but also the index. We'll see right here. Now, there are some sanzas played from the from the bottom, where people also pluck from the bottom with the index, such as the Zimbabwean mbira. What they do is that they create an hole to put the small finger under and make it more ergonomic to pluck from the bottom. So why they do that is because it helps them attend quickly between notes. But what I want you to do is pay attention when you what is this? What is that thing? What is he doing with this? What is this? That's a claw. Again, if you remember with the banjo that we discussed earlier, that's a claw. So in general, what we see with these pluck instruments in the African diaspora, to quickly alternate between notes, they develop those claw-hammer-like techniques, right? So that begs the question, when it comes, for example, to the banjo and the accounting, did all of these instruments develop the claw-hammer technique from the same source, or is it a convergent evolution from the need to attend quickly between notes? But now we will talk about the modern day. We'll talk about today. It goes from the past into the future. So, as we discussed earlier, the fiddle tradition in African American music is almost completely dead. But there are still some artists that try to revive it, such as the artist Stude Archive. So Stude Archive, she actually used to study musicology, and as a result, she saw those fiddle players both in African American culture and in West Africa and even in East Africa. And she developed her own playing style. I won't play the music video, right there, as this, we are running a bit of time. Now with the lamellophone, some artists that innovated a lot upon the lamellophone are Phil Cohen and Kevin Spears. Phil Cohen is a Chicago spiritual jazz musician that was part of the orchestra by Sun Ra, if you know him. So he's a legendary musician, and he developed his own lamellophone called the Funky Phone. Why Funky Phone? Funky Phone is based on his mother's name, who was named Funky. And he basically did that as an honor to his mother, to his so-called ancestor. So,
very important that I had an instrument that I could hit and sit. You just said bang.
So what he does is he tries to overdubs the instrument, so he would play over himself. So most recently, unfortunately, rest in peace to him, he's dead, but most recently, an album known as African Skies was released in 2025.
Personally,
version of one of his albums.
I have not
that featured the instrument in there was what I'm going to
felt my safety come into question. They do have the safety toolkit feature, which is easily accessible should anything go wrong, and it helps me feel even more safe while driving.
Wow, Allie, you're obsessed with Olive Garden's tender braised beef tortelloni. And we're obsessed with your 5-paragraph petition demanding its return. Fan favorites are back for a limited time, starting at $12.99. But unlike that petition, they won't go on forever.
So that's Phil Cohen. Another musician that innovated upon an instrument is an artist known as Kevin Spears. So what he does is he uses pedal boards to overdubs over his instrument and create effects and things of that nature.
With RideCheck, if we detect your ride goes off course, stops unexpectedly, or ends early, we'll check in to ask if everything is okay and offer resources to help. That's safety simplified. Uber.
Step into a world where the fun never ends and the possibilities are endless.
Okay, check it out.
So it tends to say that we this instrument is multiple instruments at the same time. So drum, guitar, xylophone, many different things. So that's why you tap it. And this technique of tapping the instrument is actually time.
Synthesizer or keyboard.
Yes, he uses the pedal boards and all those electronic arrangements to play over himself, for example, and further emphasize the instruments. Now, there is also so now there is also Nathan Barro. There's also Nathan Barro, an engineering student at Georgia Perimeter University, currently in the engineering pathway. So Nathan Barro, yes, that's me. He wanted to create an electronic instrument based on the sansa, basically imitating, and how some electric pianos, you can play any notes on any instrument on an electric piano because you can use samples and synths, so you can play the drums, things of that nature. That's somewhat what I was trying to imitate. So as inspiration, I used guitar strings, electric guitar strings. So electric guitars, they use what we call magnetic pickup. Magnetic pickup is when you plug a string, so it induces a charge inside of a pickup, which is then sent to the guitar amp as an electric signal. So because there is a magnet wrapped around the coil, so I'm not going to explain all the physics. Now, what is MIDI? MIDI is simply an electronic standard for musical communication. So for example, if you play a note on an electric piano, what you do is that the piano sends a MIDI message saying, oh, note C played at this velocity, at this volume, on this channel, you see? And what is nice about MIDI is that, especially on electronic instruments, you can play any instrument as a result. You can even play drums, right?
If I go to another online school and it's not like Stepful, they're gonna have to hear about it from me. Like, if you aren't
So now, unlike guitars, what I decided to use was what we call a Hall sensor. So Hall effect sensor, unlike the traditional magnetic pickup, is a sensor that uses something in physics known as the Hall effect to measure the strength of a magnetic field. So, for example, if I have a Hall sensor and I put a magnet in here and then I put it a bit further away, I can measure the distance between the magnet and the sensor. What I like about those sensors is that they have the directionality. So they only respond to the magnetic field that is above of the thing. Whereas with magnetic pickups that I use with guitars, yes, ma'am? Yes. That's with electric pickups that I use with guitars, usually you have what you call a crosstalk. So for example, when you play one string or one, in this case, tongue of the instrument, it would also induce some electric charge on the one that is nearby. But the directionality of all sensors remove that. So you see here, so that's the naked concept. So you see the Hall sensor, there is a magnet under. The reason I put the magnet under is because the magnet then creates a magnetic field with the time right there. And as a result, the magnetic sensor can measure the vibration in the time, as you can see here in this image. So you see those oscillations, that's the vibration, right? So basically by sandwiching the sensor between the magnet and the time, I can measure the vibration and that can help me know when the instrument is being plugged and send a MIDI signal to make an electronic instrument. So here that's a board. So you see there is a pickup right there. There is a Hall sensor for each time with magnets under in this wooden board. The circuit, if you are interested. And this is an unfinished prototype, but so far we have managed to at least be able to recognize when a note is being played semi-reliably. So you will see a test here. So every time I'm going to play the notes, if the note is detected, it will be not on. It failed, but not on. Not on. So instead of my computer telling me not on, not off, not on, I could have actually sent that to, I could have actually played a sample. So I could have played a sound instead of doing this. It could have been a drum, it could have been a note on a guitar. things of that nature. It's just that we are not at this stage yet in the building of these instruments. This is a work in progress, but at least the concept is working to some extent. As you can see, most of the time, the note is being detected, like the vibration. I play one, time it fails. So this simply needs to be improved again. But this is a work in progress, and when the notes are being detected reliably, then I can add an option for velocity. So how strongly the note is being played, how long the note lasts, things of that nature. And all of this will be sent as a MIDI signal to play samples or synthesizers. Thank you.
Thank you for that outstanding presentation. Nathan, you have a expertise almost in this related field, right? Yes, absolutely. Well, I would like for you to look at the screen and scan for your survey and attendance, but I would also like to present this certificate of appreciation to Nathaniel Barro from the Mario Bennekin Black History Symposium. Thank you so much for everything. Wants to take, thank you so much. And please don't forget, one more time, sorry, we had our photographer take a pictures. One more time, at 11:30 tomorrow, we have more. We have a virtual presentation by Tamla Boone, instructor of fine arts, speaking on 77% and exploration of my roots back to West Africa. And at 1 o'clock, Dr. Sean Williams, professor of English and Africana Studies, who's going to be in collaboration with the GSU Decatur Library. And that is at 1 o'clock again, in person. The first one is virtual, the second one is in person, but also we'll have that virtual for you at 1 o'clock. But come in person too if you can, because he's going to teach you how to look back at your genes and your family history. Sorry about that. Family history using the GSU library. Thank you so much for attending and have a wonderful day.